It started with a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I hesitated before opening it. Standing on my porch was a man in a neon vest, clipboard in hand. Behind him, a van with the logo EcoCharge Inc. idled loudly. The moment he saw me, his face lit up in a practiced smile. "Mr. Daniels?" he asked, his voice overly cheerful. "Yes, I replied cautiously. "Great, I'm here to install your neighborhood's new public charging station. We'll be done in no time." I blinked, completely caught off guard. "Public charging station? On my property?" He pointed to the small patch of land right by my driveway. It wasn't much, just a strip of grass, but it was mine, or at least I thought it was. "Yes, this was approved by your homeowner association," he explained, flipping through his clipboard. "You'll love it. It's eco-friendly and convenient for the community." My heart sank. I'd had more than a few run-ins with the homeowner association over the years, but this was a new low. "I didn't approve this," I said firmly, "and I don't recall being asked about it either." The man shrugged, clearly uninterested in my protest. "It's all in the bylaws, sir. Your homeowner association has the authority to make these kinds of decisions. If you have any complaints, you'll need to take it up with them." I tried calling the homeowner association immediately, but all I got was voicemail. Their office was closed for the weekend, of course. By the time the installation crew left that afternoon, a shiny new charging station stood where my grass used to be. The following week, I received an electricity bill that was nearly double the usual amount. At first, I thought it was a mistake, but after a closer look, I found a separate charge labeled Public Charging Station Usage. The association had not only taken over my property, but also decided I should foot the bill for the electricity being used. Fuming, I stormed into the homeowner association's office first thing Monday morning. Karen Mulligan, the association president, greeted me with her trademark passive-aggressive smile. Karen was a middle-aged woman who seemed to thrive on control and drama. She loved to flaunt her position as if she were royalty. "Oh, Mr. Daniels," she said sweetly, though her tone was anything but. "How can I help you?" "You can start by explaining why a public charging station was installed on my property without my consent," I snapped, "and why I'm being charged for its electricity." Karen's smile didn't waver. "As I'm sure you're aware, the homeowner association bylaws grant us certain rights to improve communal infrastructure. The charging station benefits everyone, including you." "Except it's on my land," I retorted, "and I'm the one paying for it. That's not an improvement, that's theft." Karen sighed, her patience clearly wearing thin. "I'm sorry you feel that way, Mr. Daniels, but everything we've done is perfectly legal. If you'd like to contest it, you're welcome to file a complaint. Until then, I suggest you cooperate. The last thing we want is unnecessary conflict." By the time I left the office, my frustration had turned into determination. This wasn't just about the charging station anymore. It was about standing up to the homeowner association's unchecked power. I began digging through the bylaws, looking for any clause that would support my case. That's when I discovered something alarming. The section Karen had referenced was vague at best, but it mentioned a requirement for property owners' consent for any permanent installations. Clearly, I hadn't given mine. As I prepared to confront Karen again, I started noticing other changes in the neighborhood. A small playground that had been promised for years was suddenly under construction in the common area, and Karen's name was plastered all over the announcements. Meanwhile, several other homeowners were complaining about surprise fines for minor infractions, like leaving their trash cans out a few hours too long. It was becoming clear that Karen was using her position to push her own agenda, and I wasn't the only one paying the price. Things escalated a week later. I caught a group of workers setting up additional equipment near the charging station in the dead of night. When I demanded to know what they were doing, they claimed they were upgrading the system. I recorded the entire encounter on my phone and sent it to the homeowner association. The next morning, Karen accused me of harassment and warned that further disruptions could result in fines or even legal action. At this point, I knew I couldn't fight this alone. I started talking to my neighbors, many of whom were just as fed up with Karen's antics. Together, we decided to attend the next homeowner association meeting and confront her publicly. But Karen had other plans. She canceled the meeting at the last minute, claiming unforeseen circumstances. When I checked the bylaws again, I found that any canceled meeting would automatically delay discussions for another month. It was a deliberate move to buy herself time. The tension in the neighborhood was palpable. Late one night, I received an anonymous tip. Someone had found documents suggesting that the land where the charging station was installed had been falsely reclassified as communal property. If I could get my hands on those documents, I might have a chance to expose Karen and the homeowner association's corruption. But as I soon learned, getting the truth wouldn't be easy. The anonymous tip weighed heavily on my mind. I couldn't ignore it, not after everything that had happened. If the land had indeed been reclassified illegally, it meant the homeowner association had crossed a serious line, one that could finally expose Karen's corrupt leadership. But how could I prove it? That night, I reached out to the tipster using the number they had provided. A raspy voice answered after 2 rings. Who is this? They demanded. I'm Daniel Daniels. You left me a tip about the documents related to my land, I replied cautiously. There was a pause before the voice softened slightly. Meet me at the old community center tonight, 10 p.m. Come alone. Before I could ask any questions, the line went dead. At 10 p.m., I parked my car behind the abandoned community center. The building, once the heart of the neighborhood, was now boarded up and forgotten. A single figure emerged from the shadows, their face hidden under a hood. Are you the one who called me? I asked, stepping out of my car. The figure nodded and handed me a manila envelope. Everything you need is in here. Proof that Karen and the homeowner association reclassified your property without your consent. But be careful, they won't go down without a fight. Before I could ask their name, they disappeared into the night. Back home, I opened the envelope and spread its contents across my dining table. There it was, forged signatures, altered property maps, and emails between Karen and a representative from the construction company. The emails detailed a scheme to install the charging station and claim the land as communal property to justify the installation. Karen had even negotiated a personal commission from the company for her efforts. My hands trembled as I read through the documents. This wasn't just about me anymore. Karen had exploited her position for personal gain, and the entire neighborhood was suffering because of it. The next day, I began sharing the evidence with my neighbors. Their reactions ranged from shock to anger. Many had suspected Karen of underhanded dealings, but seeing the proof ignited a collective fury. We decided to take action together. First, we filed a formal complaint with the county registrar, attaching the forged documents as evidence. If the land's reclassification could be reversed, the charging station would have to be removed. Next, we began preparing for the upcoming homeowner association meeting. Karen couldn't cancel this one without drawing suspicion, and we planned to confront her publicly. The day of the meeting arrived, and the room was packed. Karen sat at the head of the table, her smile more forced than usual. The tension in the air was palpable. Before we begin, I said, standing up, I have something to share with everyone. Karen's smile faltered, but she quickly composed herself. Mr. Daniels, this is not the time for personal grievances. If you have a complaint, you can file it through the proper channels. I already did, I replied, holding up a stack of documents. And I have proof that you've been manipulating this association for your own benefit. Gasps rippled through the room as I began presenting the evidence. I showed the forged documents, the altered maps, and the incriminating emails. As I spoke, Karen's face turned red, and she interrupted several times, accusing me of fabricating the evidence. This is a baseless attack, she shouted. None of this is true. Then explain why your name is on these emails, I countered, holding up a printout. Explain why my property was reclassified without my consent. Explain why you've been taking kickbacks from the construction company. Karen had no answers. The room erupted in chaos as neighbors began shouting, demanding her resignation. But Karen wasn't going down without a fight. 2 days after the meeting, I came home to find a notice on my door. It was a cease and desist letter from the homeowner association's lawyer, accusing me of defamation and threatening legal action if I didn't retract my statements. I knew this was a scare tactic, but it still rattled me. Karen was desperate, and desperate people were dangerous. I decided to double down, reaching out to the local news to share my story. If Karen wanted a fight, she was about to get one. The news station agreed to run a segment on the homeowner association's corruption, and a reporter came to my house to interview me. As I recounted everything that had happened, I couldn't help but feel a mix of anger and hope. This was my chance to expose Karen on a larger scale. But the night before the story aired, my car was vandalized. Someone had smashed the windows and spray painted the word liar across the hood. My heart sank as I stared at the damage. This wasn't just about property anymore. It was personal. I called the police, but their response was lukewarm at best. Without witnesses, there wasn't much they could do. Still, I filed a report and made sure to mention Karen and the homeowner association. I wasn't going to let them intimidate me. As the days went on, support from my neighbors grew. More people came forward with their own stories of unfair fines, unexplained charges, and shady dealings by the homeowner association. Karen's grip on the community was slipping, but I knew she wouldn't give up easily. The final straw came when I received an anonymous tip that Karen was planning to call an emergency meeting to vote me out of the association altogether. She was trying to silence me, but I wasn't about to let her win. The notice for the emergency meeting arrived late at night, slid under my door like a secret threat. The document was as formal as it was foreboding, signed by Karen herself, declaring an agenda that included addressing recent allegations and preserving the integrity of the homeowner association. It didn't take a genius to figure out what that meant. They were coming for me. The meeting was scheduled for 2 days later, giving me little time to prepare. I spent those hours gathering every shred of evidence I had, organizing emails, maps, and witness statements into a binder that felt like both a shield and a weapon. My neighbors, now allies, assured me they'd show up to support me, but the tension was palpable. Karen was desperate, and desperate people played dirty. The evening of the meeting, the community center was packed. Rows of folding chairs were filled with neighbors, their faces a mix of curiosity, anger, and apprehension. At the front of the room, Karen sat flanked by her loyal board members, their expressions grim and resolute. She wore her usual smug smile, but there was a flicker of unease in her eyes. I took a seat near the front, my binder resting on my lap. The murmurs in the room quieted as Karen stood and tapped the microphone. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," she began, her tone dripping with false sweetness. "Tonight's meeting is about maintaining the harmony and trust that make our community so special. Unfortunately, recent events have threatened that harmony." Her gaze landed on me sharp as a knife. "Mr. Daniels has made serious accusations against this association. Accusations that are not only unfounded, but damaging to our reputation." A few scattered gasps rippled through the crowd. I stood up, my heart pounding, but my resolve firm. "The only thing damaging this community is your corruption," I said, my voice steady. "And I have the evidence to prove it." Karen's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "Mr. Daniels, if you have something to say, you'll have your turn. For now, please sit down." "No," I replied. "The community deserves to hear the truth." I stepped to the front of the room, ignoring Karen's protests, and placed my binder on the podium. "This," I said, opening it, "is proof that Karen and the homeowner association have been exploiting us for their own gain." I began presenting the evidence, starting with the forged documents that reclassified my property. The crowd murmured in shock as I showed the altered maps and emails detailing Karen's deal with the construction company. I pointed out the financial discrepancies in the association's budget, highlighting unexplained expenses that lined up suspiciously with Karen's personal projects. Karen interrupted several times, calling my evidence fabricated and out of context, but the tide was turning. Neighbors who had once been silent began to speak up, sharing their own experiences with unfair fines and unexplained charges. The meeting descended into chaos. Karen's loyalists tried to regain control, but the room had turned against them. Shouting matches broke out, accusations flying in every direction. In the middle of it all, Karen stood, her face red with fury. "This is slander," she shouted, banging her gavel. "I will not tolerate this kind of behavior in my community." "It's not your community," I shot back. "It's ours. And we're done letting you abuse your power." Karen stormed out, her board members scrambling to follow. The room erupted in cheers and applause, but I knew this wasn't over. Karen wouldn't go down quietly, and I needed to prepare for whatever came next. The next morning, the retaliation began. My mailbox was stuffed with letters from the homeowner association, each one more absurd than the last. They accused me of violating obscure bylaws, threatened me with more fines, and even suggested they might revoke my membership in the association entirely. Then came the police. 2 officers showed up at my door with a warrant to search my property, claiming they'd received a tip about illegal modifications. It was a clear act of intimidation, but I let them in, knowing I had nothing to hide. They left empty-handed, but the message was clear. Karen was using every tool at her disposal to break me. That evening, I met with my neighbors to discuss our next steps. We decided to hold a community vote to remove Karen from her position. According to the bylaws, if a majority of homeowners voted against her, she would be forced to step down. It was a risky move, but it was our best shot. We spent the next week canvassing the neighborhood, knocking on doors and sharing our stories. Some people were hesitant, afraid of retaliation, but many were eager to see Karen go. The momentum was building, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. The night of the vote, the tension was unbearable. The community center was packed again, and Karen was noticeably absent. Her loyalists tried to defend her, but their arguments fell flat against the mountain of evidence we'd collected. When the votes were finally counted, the result was clear. Karen was out. Cheers erupted, and for the first time, I felt like the community had truly come together. But as I looked around the room, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Karen might have been removed from power, but her influence lingered, and I knew she wouldn't go down without a fight. As the crowd celebrated, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You think this is over? You have no idea what's coming." Karen's removal from the homeowner association was a victory, but it felt hollow. Her absence didn't bring the peace I had hoped for. Instead, it unleashed a wave of chaos and retaliation. The morning after the vote, I found my property vandalized. My front yard, once neatly kept, was littered with trash and broken glass. The charging station on my land, a symbol of everything wrong, had been tampered with. Its screen flashed a cryptic message: "You can't win." I reported the vandalism to the police, but their response was dismissive. "Probably some kids," the officer said, jotting down notes without much interest. I knew better. This wasn't random. This was Karen. That evening, I gathered with my neighbors to discuss the next steps. The energy in the room was a mix of triumph and fear. While many were relieved to see Karen gone, others were wary of what her loyalists might do. "She's not going to stop," one neighbor said, his voice low. "She's too connected, too vindictive." "We can't let her scare us," I replied. "We've already come this far. If we back down now, she wins." The room murmured in agreement, but I could see the unease in their eyes. Karen had ruled through fear for so long, and shaking that hold wasn't easy. A few days later, I received a letter in the mail. It was from a lawyer representing Karen. The document was filled with legal jargon, but the message was clear. She was suing me for defamation. According to her claims, my accusations at the meeting had caused her severe emotional distress and damage to her reputation. It was a blatant attempt to silence me, and I refused to let it work. I contacted a lawyer of my own, who assured me we had a strong case. Still, the lawsuit loomed over me like a dark cloud, and the stress began to take its toll. As the weeks dragged on, the harassment escalated. My mailbox was filled with anonymous hate mail. Strange cars idled outside my house late at night. My neighbors reported similar incidents: slashed tires, dead animals left on porches, and threatening notes. One night, I woke to the sound of footsteps outside my window. Grabbing my phone, I peeked through the blinds and saw a figure darting across my yard. I managed to snap a photo before they disappeared into the darkness. The next morning, I showed the photo to the police, but they shrugged it off. "Hard to say who it is," the officer said. "Unless they're caught in the act, there's not much we can do." Frustrated but undeterred, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I installed security cameras around my property and encouraged my neighbors to do the same. If Karen and her cronies wanted to intimidate us, we would make sure they were caught in the act. The cameras paid off sooner than expected. Late one night, the motion sensor alerted me to activity in my backyard. I opened the live feed on my phone and saw two figures near the charging station. One of them was holding a spray can, while the other appeared to be tampering with the wires. I called the police and raced outside, yelling at the intruders to stop. They took off running, but not before the cameras captured clear images of their faces. To my shock, one of them was a member of the former homeowner association board, a close ally of Karen. The police finally had enough evidence to act. They arrested the intruders and began investigating the vandalism and harassment. News of the arrest spread quickly, and the neighborhood buzzed with whispers. Karen's loyalists were on the defensive, their once solid front beginning to crumble. But Karen herself remained untouchable. She denied any involvement, claiming she had moved on from the homeowner association and had nothing to do with the incidents. Her lawsuit against me continued to drag on, draining my time and resources. In the midst of all this, I received another anonymous tip. This time, it was a USB drive left in my mailbox. The note attached simply read, "The truth." I plugged the drive into my computer, and my screen filled with folders labeled financials, emails, and projects. It was a treasure trove of incriminating evidence against Karen and her allies. Detailed records of kickbacks, fraudulent transactions, and secret deals that implicated not only Karen, but also the construction company and even some local officials. This was the smoking gun I needed. I immediately shared the files with my lawyer, who advised me to take them to the authorities. Within days, an investigation was launched. Karen's name was splashed across the local headlines, and the community's anger boiled over. Neighbors who had once supported her began distancing themselves, and even her staunchest allies couldn't defend the mountain of evidence. Karen went into hiding, her social media accounts deleted, her house eerily quiet. But the damage she'd done lingered. The lawsuit was still active, and the scars of her reign were etched into the neighborhood. I knew we were nearing the end of this battle, but I also knew the war wasn't over. As I stood in my yard looking at the charging station that had started it all, my phone buzzed with a new message. It was from an unknown number. "You may have won this round, but I'm not finished. Watch your back." The message from the unknown number wasn't just a warning, it was a promise. Karen wasn't finished, and neither was I. The neighborhood buzzed with tension as the investigation into her activities deepened. For the first time, it felt like the walls were closing in on her. But I knew better than to underestimate someone like Karen. The lawsuit she had filed against me was still active, and her legal team was relentless. My lawyer, David, kept reassuring me we had a solid case. But the court dates, depositions, and constant barrage of paperwork were exhausting. Worse yet, Karen's supporters hadn't completely disappeared. Anonymous hate mail continued to show up in my mailbox, and strange cars still lingered near my house at odd hours. One evening, David called with urgent news. "We need to talk," he said. "Can you come to my office tomorrow morning?" When I arrived, he looked unusually tense. He slid a folder across the desk. Inside were copies of emails and financial records from the USB drive I'd received. They were damning, but David's expression told me there was more. "Karen's team is claiming these documents were obtained illegally," he explained. "They're trying to have them thrown out as evidence. If they succeed, it could weaken our case." I clenched my fists. "But they're legitimate. You've seen them." "That's not the point," David said. "It's about perception. If the judge believes the evidence was obtained improperly, it could jeopardize everything." I left his office feeling the weight of the world on my shoulders. Karen was playing dirty, as always, but I refused to let her win. As the court date approached, the community's support became my lifeline. Neighbors who had once been too afraid to speak out now rallied behind me. They wrote letters to the court, attended hearings, and even started a petition to have the lawsuit dismissed. The momentum was growing, but so was Karen's desperation. One night I woke to the sound of glass shattering. Rushing downstairs, I found my living room window smashed and a brick lying on the floor. Attached to it was a note: "Drop the case or else." The police took my statement, but their usual apathy was on full display. "Probably just some kids," the officer said, as if reading from a script. Frustrated, I decided to take a different approach. I shared the incident on social media, along with photos of the brick and note. The post went viral within hours, attracting attention from local news outlets. The pressure on Karen was mounting, and she couldn't hide forever. The day of the final court hearing arrived, and the atmosphere was electric. The courtroom was packed with neighbors, reporters, and even some former homeowner association board members. Karen's legal team looked smug, as if they'd already won. But David had a few surprises up his sleeve. When it was our turn to present, he introduced a new witness, a former homeowner association board member who had turned against Karen. The witness testified about the inner workings of her schemes, confirming the authenticity of the documents and revealing even more illegal activities. Karen's composure cracked. She interrupted the testimony several times, earning sharp rebukes from the judge. Her lawyer's objections were overruled, one after another. By the time David finished his cross-examination, the courtroom was abuzz with whispers. The verdict came quickly. The judge dismissed Karen's lawsuit, ruling that the evidence against her was overwhelming and credible. As the decision was read aloud, a wave of relief washed over me. The crowd erupted into applause, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. But the victory didn't end there. The investigation into Karen's activities led to multiple charges being filed against her, including fraud, embezzlement, and harassment. Her allies abandoned her one by one, and she soon became a pariah in the community she once controlled with an iron fist. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood began to heal. The charging station was removed from my property, and the land reclassified back to its original status. New leadership was elected for the Homeowner Association, and transparency became their top priority. As for me, I decided to stay. This was my home, and I wasn't going to let anyone drive me out. The battle had been brutal, but it proved something important. Even the most entrenched power structures could be challenged when people stood together. One evening, as I sat on my porch watching the sunset, my phone buzzed with a new message. This time, it was from a neighbor I barely knew. "Thank you for fighting for all of us," it read. "You reminded us that we have a voice." I smiled, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. Karen might have started this war, but we had finished it together.